She was always Maggie. I could never have imagined her like that. Frail, pasty, gray, curled in a bed like a tiny child, with the sheets in her nightgown in disarray, her eyes squeezed shut, her mouth hanging open, moist and vacant. She'd had been mortified to see her that way, my Aunt Sel. She'd been so alive and feisty. She'd hitchhiked from Boston to Chicago with a friend when she was 14. One man stopped and asked if they were amiable. Maybe it was amenable. And they fled. Supported herself all her life as a bookkeeper, and even when she was old, she did the crosswords with a pen. Her real name was Cecilia, but everyone called her Sel, until, at 80, she underwent a kind of transformation. Although she didn't jog, she started wearing fuchsia jogging suits, and decided she wanted to be called Maggie. There was always a Maggie inside her trying to get out, she said. So now she was Maggie to everyone, except my father, who for some strange reason refused to respect her decision and continued to call her Sel behind her back. It didn't matter much either way, because in my memory, they rarely spoke to each other directly. As a matter of fact, she disturbed him so much that my father threatened to be cremated when he died. That was pretty unlikely for a semi-Orthodox Jew, and have his ashes thrown in her face. I never knew why they disliked each other so, but I think it might have had something to do with how my father treated my mother. He could be domineering and abrasive with her, although with others he was quite charming, like a gentleman of the old school. It took us many years to understand that he was bipolar, long before it became so fashionable, which may have accounted, at least in part, for his sometimes erratic behavior. Of course, I could be wrong about the enmity between him and Maggie. She was my mother, Helen's older sister, and they had an older brother, Maurice. Mickey, we called him. He was a pharmacist and opened his own ethical drugstore, Tesler's Apothecary. But he also wrote pulp fiction detective stories. When he came home late at night, he either wrote or played the piano in the basement. He had a mute so that he wouldn't disturb my Aunt Sarah. She could be cranky, who was asleep upstairs. In the winter, he played the piano with woolen gloves. When Uncle Mickey wrote, he used the pseudonym Maurice N.H. Tesler. N.H. stood for no hurry. My delightful, jolly, clever uncle adopted it when his impatient publisher tried to hold him to a deadline. Helpfully, maybe he just wanted to get in on the creative act. My father suggested a clue for one of his stories. Mickey's publisher lost no time telling him that it was old, even ancient. Mickey got a huge kick out of that. He never let my father hear the end of it. The problem, when there was a problem, was that my mother's brother, Mickey, married my dad's sister, Sarah. It was a very tight-knit group. My wife, Deborah, a marriage and family therapist, said from the beginning, even before she was credentialed, that accounted for all of my dysfunctions. Everyone in my family was just too damned close. Of course we were. Maggie was petite and attractive, but she was a spinster her whole life, and there was much conjecture about whether she'd ever had a sexual encounter. Despite the widespread curiosity, I preferred to remain uninformed. She was devoted to my mother, and whenever my parents moved, Maggie was not far behind. Somehow she always managed to find a new job and a pleasant studio apartment in her new surroundings. Actually, she made them pleasant. I remember almost every one. They were all as tasteful and well-appointed as she herself was. Maggie was careful with money. If a landlord raised her rent by $10, she inevitably moved. But when I was a kid with severe asthma, she loaned my parents enough money to help send me to boarding school in the Tucson desert. I didn't know that until much later. By then we were able to reciprocate. We paid to move her from San Francisco to Hollywood and help her get settled. I remember she smoked Raleigh cigarettes for a while because they had gift coupons on the back of each pack. When I was very young, she owned a blue coupe with a rumble seat and a wire-haired terrier named Rowdy. As Maggie, she began wearing her fuchsia jogging suits to a senior center, where she eagerly participated in writing and acting classes. Deborah and I once went there to see her perform in a one-act play. She was remarkably good, a natural, and the stories she began to write were fresh and charming. She absolutely thrived for a while, then gradually began to fail, until we felt she could no longer take care of herself. Over her strenuous objections, we found a place for her in a lovely assisted living facility where she was content and even had a kind of boyfriend at last. But after a series of late-night emergency calls, we had to relocate her to the Jewish home for the aging nearby, where she was never comfortable. Before long, we realized that the main cause of her discomfort was the need to share her room. She'd never lived with anyone in close proximity before, and hated it. One by one, she alienated and rejected each roommate, complaining about their personalities, their daily routines, and their personal hygiene. It soon became apparent that it was Maggie who was creating the chaos. Having heard that there was a few one-person rooms available, but only when someone died, or if there was a major problem, she almost made it, but never lived to enjoy that simple luxury. She spent her last few weeks in the home's small infirmary, in bed, asleep much of the time, disappearing before our eyes. Once when she woke up to find me by her bedside, she clutched at me and begged me to help her die. She was suffering so, and miserable. Then she dozed off again. We were alone. I thought it would take very little effort for me to cover her face with a pillow. She was asleep anyway. I was about to do it. I think I was, when she shifted her position in the bed, murmuring slightly, and the moment passed. Earlier, I had done a good deal of research on death and dying for an episode of The Bold Ones I was producing. Academy Award-winning screenwriter Michael Blankford wrote it with me. I'd read about lights at the end of long tunnels appearing at the final hour, and about the necessity to give oneself up to the journey. The next time I visited with Maggie and she voiced her despair, I waited until I thought she was asleep again, then leaned close and whispered softly to her, "Maggie, you may see a tunnel, a long tunnel, and at the end there's a bright light, and if you feel that you want to, it's okay to give in, to go to the light, to embrace it. You have permission." Suddenly, she sat bolt upright in bed, startling me. "What the hell are you talking about?" she said, momentarily restored. In that instant, I was somehow again reminded that Katharine Hepburn had always been her idol. It was only a matter of time until we got the ultimate and dreaded late-night call. Deborah and I had taken care of Maggie for some time. Now we would take care of her last wishes, to be cremated. Much to my occasionally orthodox father's horror, she had purchased a cemetery plot next to ours. We'd bought them together with my parents some time ago when it became clear that my father would never take the initiative alone, and we planned to bury her remains there. They held a brief, impersonal service in the dining room at the Jewish home, which Deborah, Susan, Robin, and I attended. No one had anything special to say about Maggie. They hardly knew her, except as a nuisance. But funerals were clearly an event to celebrate the living, perhaps more than the dead. I remembered a song she used to sing, and I got up and sang it. One day I ordered an oyster stew, alone, tee-hee, alone, and the little oyster appeared to me, alone, tee-hee, alone. He looked at me so full of glee. "I've been in so many a stew," said he, "but don't tell the cook that you saw me, alone, tee-hee, alone." There was a second verse, which I didn't sing, but would have told the people who hardly knew her something about my Aunt Maggie. "Once I went to the junior prom, alone, tee-hee, alone. I'd sit with the chaperone, alone, tee-hee, alone. But if a man should look at me, I'd wink at him so coaxingly, possibly then I would not be, alone, tee-hee, alone." Deborah and I and our daughter Susan drove to the Neptune Society and picked up a small container which held all that was left of my Aunt Maggie. We drove in silence to the cemetery, Susan holding the container tightly in her lap. The open grave was waiting, and men with shovels next to the blanketed mound of earth. We put Aunt Maggie to rest there, Deborah, Susan, and I, remembering her zest, her style, her fierce independence. There was only one other mourner, my father.